Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're kind of swapping power armor for plate mail as we plunge into Doom, the Dark Ages.
Yeah, the latest in the Doom saga.
It's a whole new setting, grim, medieval, dark. But that classic, fast, brutal Doom combat, still very much there.
Oh, absolutely. And today, we're really digging into how this thing actually runs on PC.
Right. We've been looking at some really detailed reports, haven't we? From Hardware Unboxed, Gamers Nexus.
Yep, they've put it through its paces, so we've got a good idea of the performance picture.
Okay, so let's unpack this. One of the first things, and this seems like a huge deal for Doom, mandatory ray tracing.
That's the one. It's a big shift.
Yeah, because Doom's always been known for running super smooth, even on, less powerful PCs. So having ray tracing always on, that changes the requirements, right?
Yes, and changes the game completely. So yeah, we're going to break down exactly what GPU you'll need for different resolutions.
And maybe why the performance is what it is.
Exactly. And we'll look at those reasons, the potential bottlenecks.
And importantly, I think, for people wanting to maybe squeeze a bit more performance out or run it on slightly older gear, upscaling.
Definitely covering upscaling.
Yeah.
DLSS, FSR, XSS, how they perform is key here.
Cool. So by the end of this, you should have a pretty clear picture of what it actually takes to run Doom, the Dark Ages, on your rig, hopefully without needing a PhD in computer hardware, right?
Let's do it. So, first up, minimum requirements. What does your PC actually need?
And for a game like Doom, minimum isn't just about loading the game, right? It needs to feel responsive.
Precisely. We're talking like 40 to 60 FPS, ideally even on low settings. It's got to feel smooth for that fast combat.
Okay, so what's the official word from Bethesda?
Officially, they say you need an NVIDIA RTX 2060 Super or an AMD RX 6600, or better, obviously.
Yeah.
Plus 8 gigs of VRAM. That's supposedly for 1080p, 60 FPS on low settings.
And critically, ray tracing is on even there.
Mandatory. Always on, even at minimum spec.
The independent tests paint a slightly different picture.
Well, yeah, that's where Hardware Unboxing Gamers Nexus come in. They give us the real-world story.
Right.
And when they push settings up to Ultra Nightmare, maxed out everything. Even a stronger card, like an RTX 2080 Ti, actually struggled.
At 1080?
At 1080p, struggled to hold 60 FPS consistently. And that's without using any upscaling tech like DLSS or FSR.
Wow. Okay, so that official minimum, it sounds like it might be just scraping by, like really minimal.
Exactly. Just enough to get in the door, maybe. And that brings up VRAM.
Video memory, right? The card's on RAM.
Yep. Think of it as the GPU's workbench. It holds all the textures, the visual data it needs right now.
And EGB might not be enough if you push things.
Could be a bottleneck, yeah. Especially if you try higher settings or, crucially, higher resolutions. Because ray tracing, it just eats VRAM. Those complex light calculations need a lot of memory space.
Okay, so 1080p low might work on the minimum spec cards. What happens when you want, better visuals or a higher resolution?
That's where the demands really, really ramp up.
I bet.
Testing at 1440p, still on max settings, Ultra Nightmare. The benchmarks showed only cards like the RTX 3080 from NVIDIA or the AMD Radeon RX 6900 XT were consistently staying above 60 FPS.
Okay, so that's a pretty significant jump in hardware needed for 1440p Ultra.
Definitely.
And I'm almost afraid to ask. 4K, native 4K Ultra.
Yeah, that's the peak of the mountain. Gamers Nexus found that really only the absolute latest top-end card, the RTX 5090.
The 5090?
Yeah, only that could reliably hold 60 frames per second at native 4K Ultra Nightmare.
That's intense. It really shows how much that mandatory ray tracing changes the equation.
It massively raises the performance bar. And like you said, it's a huge departure for Doom, potentially leaves players with older, non-RTX GPUs completely out.
Which has definitely caused some chatter online, given Doom's history of being so well optimized.
Understandably so. It's a different philosophy.
Okay, so let's try and ballpark it for people. Based on the official minimums and extrapolating from those high-end tests, what's a realistic minimum GPU for just a playable experience? Say, 40 FPS-ish, low settings.
Okay, yeah, if we're aiming for just playable at low settings, maybe around 40 FPS.
Right.
For 1080p, those official minimums, RTX 2060 Super, RX 6600, something around there should probably get you into that 40-60 FPS range. Seems plausible.
Okay. And 1440p low.
Estimating here, but you'd likely need to step up maybe an RTX 3060 Ti, or for AMD, perhaps an RX 6700 XT. That might get you into the 40s, maybe touching 50 FPS at low.
And 4K low, still just aiming for playable.
Oof. At 4K low, you're probably looking at something like an RTX 3080 or maybe an RX 6800 territory. Again, just estimating maybe hitting 30-40 FPS.
Right. And important to stress, those 1440p and 4K low figures are estimations, yeah, based on the ultra results and the official minimums.
Exactly. They're educated guesses aiming for just playable, not, a super smooth ideal experience.
Got it. That breakdown helps set expectations. Okay, let's move beyond the minimums and look at those detailed benchmarks. What did they show across different cards and settings?
Right, the comprehensive tests. So at 1080p Ultra Nightmare, the highest preset, cards like the RTX 3060 Ti and the RX 6700 XT were generally getting above 60 FPS.
That's good news for 1080p gamers with decent mid-range cards.
Yeah, definitely solid performance there. Good for high refresh rate monitors, too.
What about 1440p? That's a popular spot these days.
At 1440p, like we touched on, mid-range cards can give you playable frame rates if you drop settings down to high.
Okay.
But if you want that consistent 60 FPS, especially on higher settings, you're often needing that RTX 3080 or RX 6900 XT level of power.
And then the 4K beast.
Yep, 4K Ultra Nightmare. That's where only the top dogs play. RTX 4090, the new RTX 5090, consistently over 60 FPS.
But AMD wasn't too far behind at 4K.
No, actually, the Radeon RX 7900 XTX performed really well, often neck and neck with the NVIDIA RTX 4080 at 4K.
Yeah.
So strong showing from AMD there.
Always good to see that competition at the top. Keeps things interesting.
Definitely. And speaking of interesting, there was that slightly odd result with the AMD Radeon RX 9070 XT.
Right. What was that about? Performing better than a newer NVIDIA card sometimes.
Yeah, in some tests, it actually edged out the NVIDIA RTX 5080, which is unexpected.
So what does that usually mean? Drivers, game optimization.
Could be either or both. Sometimes specific driver versions are just really well tuned for a game at launch, or maybe the Intec 8 engine itself has some quirks or optimizations that just happen to favor the AMD architecture in certain rendering scenarios.
Something to watch maybe as drivers and patches roll out?
Always is. The performance landscape can shift.
So summing up the NVIDIA versus AMD battle based on these tests.
Well, at 1080p and 1440p, it looks pretty competitive. Both sides have strong options.
Okay.
But when you really push it, 4K Ultra Nightmare NVIDIA's very top cards, the 4090 and 5090, seem to have the absolute edge. Though, again, the 7900 XTX is right there, and that RX 9070 XT anomaly is curious.
And Intel's getting in on the action too.
They are. The Intel Arc B580, even with what were described as early drivers, managed a playable 56 FPS.
At 1080p Ultra Nightmare.
Yep, at 1080p Ultra Nightmare, which is genuinely pretty impressive for Intel's current lineup. Shows they're making progress.
Good to see more competition. Okay, let's add some context. How does this PC performance compare to playing on consoles, like PS5 or Xbox Series X?
Good question. So the target for Doom, the Dark Ages on the Xbox Series X and S and the PS5 is 60 FPS.
Right.
They're aiming for that smooth experience. The PS5 Pro is apparently delivering the crispest image, suggesting maybe higher internal resolutions or settings there.
But consoles usually have optimized settings, not quite like PC presets.
Exactly. They're tailored, but the fact they're hitting 60 FPS generally shows the game can be optimized well for specific hardware. The Xbox Series S naturally runs at lower resolutions to keep that frame rate up.
So to get that console-level smoothness and visual quality on PC,
you're looking at needing a pretty decent mid to high-end GPU, something comparable to what's needed for 1080p or maybe 1440p high settings on PC to match that Series X or PS5 feel.
Okay, that helps frame it. Can we put some actual numbers on the board? Average FPS for key cards at Ultra Nightmare?
Sure. Let's run through some averages, keeping in mind these can fluctuate.
Of course.
RTX 3060 Ti, about 95 FPS at 1080p, 68 at 1440p, 38 at 4K, RX 6700 XT, very similar, 90, 65, 35.
Okay, solid mid-range.
Stepping up. RTX 3080, around 135 at 1080p, 98 at 1440p, 55 at 4K, RX 6900 XT, close again 130, 95, 52.
Getting into high-end territory then.
Then the current gen high-end, RTX 4080. 170 at 1080p, 125 at 1440p, 70 at 4K, RX 7900 XT, 168 and 95090.
RTX 5080, 155, 11565, RTX 5090. Basically pegged 200 plus at 1080p, 150 plus at 1440p, 90 plus at 4K.
Wow. And the Intel card.
Intel Arc B580, that solid 56 FPS at 1080p Ultra Nightmare. Didn't see reliable 1440p 4K numbers for it in these tests.
Great overview. But again, averages, right? It'll vary.
Absolutely. Depends on the scene, your CPU, RAM, everything else. But it gives a good relative picture. Okay, so why are we seeing these numbers? Let's talk causes for slowdowns or performance differences.
Number one reason, we keep coming back to it. Mandatory ray tracing.
Right.
It looks great, realistic light, reflections,
Yeah.
but it's just incredibly computationally expensive. The GPU has to do way more work.
And compared to older Doom games where it was optional or absent,
The performance hit is obvious. You just need a much more powerful GPU for similar frame rates. And yeah, we can't even turn it off in this game to see the difference directly.
is it just reflections or more complex ray tracing?
It uses Ray Trace Global Illumination, RTGI. That's more advanced.
Okay, what does that mean practically?
Think of it like calculating how light bounces off everything realistically, creating softer, more natural ambient light, not just shiny surfaces, but yeah, adds significantly to the GPU load.
So way beyond simple reflections. Got it. What about the CPU? Does that matter much here?
It seems mainly GPU bound. The game leans heavily on the graphics card.
Oh,
The official CPU requirements are pretty high, like an AMD Zen 2 or Intel 10th Gen, 8 cores, 16 threads.
that's really beefy.
Yeah, it suggests the EditTech 8 engine is using those cores, especially with ray tracing calculations potentially offloaded or managed alongside the GPU tasks.
So if you have an older CPU, fewer cores,
You might hit a bottleneck in heavy scenes.
could happen, yeah. Especially during intense combat moments.
Okay. And VRAM. We touched on it, but how critical is having enough?
Super critical, especially at higher resolutions and settings. More detail means more textures and data need to fit in that VRAM.
And Bethesda has recommendations.
They do. 8 GB minimum, but suggesting 10 GB for 1440p Ultra, even 16 GB for 4K Ultra.
And if you don't have enough, what
You
happened?
get stuttering, little freezes, and generally lower frame rates because the GPU is constantly having to pull data from your main system RAM, which is much slower.
So it's not just about raw processing power, memory matters too. Big time. Hardware Unboxed even noted the texture pool size setting in the game didn't have a huge range, suggesting the game might allocate VRAM somewhat rigidly.
Interesting. So enough VRAM is key for smoothness, especially with RT demanding more.
Absolutely. Then there's just general game optimization and driver maturity.
Right, the usual suspects.
Some early reports suggested Dark Ages might not be quite as flawlessly optimized at launch as Doom Eternal was famously known to be.
Okay.
And Hardware Unboxed saw those initial driver issues with the new NVIDIA 50 series cards, though later drivers improved things. Just shows how crucial up-to-date game-ready drivers are.
Yeah, standard advice, but always important. Performance often improves post-launch.
Definitely. And there was that weirdness PC Gamer reported about how the game feels at certain frame rates.
Oh yeah, the treacle like below 30 FPS and disjointed between 90 120.
Exactly. That suggests some engine-level design choices affecting perceived smoothness, not just the raw FPS number.
How so?
Well, they also noted the game's internal clock seems tied to the frame rate below 30 FPS. Little engine quirks like that can really impact how playable the game feels on lower-end systems, even beyond just the numbers.
Fascinating. Engine design influencing the feel of performance. Okay, so performance is demanding. Let's talk solutions. Upscaling.
DLSS 4, FSR 3.0, Intel XSS, these are vital tools here.
Especially for higher resolutions with ray tracing on.
Absolutely, they're designed to lessen that performance hit.
So, quick recap. How do they work? Render low, upscale high.
Basically, yeah. Render the game internally at a lower resolution, then use smart algorithms, AI, essentially, for DLSS and XSS to upscale it to your monitor's native resolution. Boost FPS, ideally without losing too much visual quality.
And the benchmarks showed they work well here. Big FPS gains.
Oh yeah, really significant gains. Gamers Nexus got that RTX 5090 over 260 FPS at 4K using DLSS 4 with frame generation maxed out.
Whoa.
And Hardware Unboxed saw big jumps across the board with both DLSS and FSR. They definitely help a lot.
Okay, what about the frame generation part? DLSS 4 and FSR 3.0 both have it now. How's that different?
FrameGen actually creates new synthetic frames in between the normally rendered ones. It analyzes motion between frames and inserts an artificial one.
So it makes the perceived frame rate even higher, look smoother.
That's the goal, yeah. Can make motion look incredibly fluid.
But there's always a but, isn't there? What's the catch?
Latency. Input lag. That's the trade-off.
Explain that.
Because those generated frames are created after the game processes your input for the real frames, there's an added delay between you clicking the mouse or pressing a key and seeing the result fully reflected on screen.
And in a fast game like Doom.
That could be noticeable,
Yeah.
Could feel a bit floaty or less responsive, especially for players really sensitive to input lag. TechPowerUp mentioned they could receive latency with DLSS-FG on the 5090 at 4K.
So something to be aware of if you're latency sensitive.
Definitely. You might prefer just using the upscaling part without FrameGen, or maybe tuning the FrameGen settings if possible.
Were there differences reported between NVIDIA's and AMD's frame gen?
Seems like it, yeah. Rock Paper Shotgun suggested caution with FSR frame generation, saying it could feel sluggish or look jittery sometimes.
Okay.
Whereas DLSS frame generation, especially the new DLSS 4 version, seemed to get more positive initial reactions. Gamers Nexus liked the native DLSS 4 MFG support, said it was smooth, no weird artifacts.
So potentially a better experience there for NVIDIA users with the right cards?
Potentially, yeah. Looks promising.
So bottom line on upscaling. Essential for hitting high frame rates, especially at 1440p and 4K, but you need to weigh the frame generation latency trade-off for yourself.
Exactly that. Experimentation is key to find what feels right for you and your setup.
Okay, let's shift perspective. How does the Dark Ages compare performance-wise to the previous games, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal? They were famous for running well.
Yeah, that's a big point of comparison.
Yeah.
And generally, the consensus from testers like Hardware Unboxed, Gamers Nexus, and anecdotal reports is that Dark Ages runs slower.
Slower than Eternal in 2016 at similar settings.
Seems so, yeah. We saw that Steam user comment about a big performance drop from Eternal on their 6800 XT.
And Rock, Paper, Shotgun.
They noted Eternal could run at basically double the frame rate on an RTX 4060 compared to Dark Ages, both at native 1080p.
Wow, double. That's significant. And the main culprit is?
Almost certainly that mandatory ray tracing again. It's just a much heavier load than those previous titles demanded, even when they had optional RT features.
Makes sense. Could the gameplay changes play a role too? More grounded combat, the shield?
It's possible. Eternal was all about hyper-fast vertical movement. Dark Ages seems a bit different with the shield mechanic. Different gameplay whips can stress hardware in different ways. Maybe different CPU loads.
Interesting thought. And visually, is Dark Ages a huge leap over Eternal to justify the performance cost?
The general feeling seems to be that while Dark Ages looks great, very impressive, it's maybe not so dramatically better than Eternal that the performance difference feels entirely justified to everyone.
Right. Eternal looked amazing and ran incredibly well. That was its magic.
Exactly. It was exceptionally optimized. So while Dark Ages runs okay on modern stuff, especially with upscaling, that entry barrier, the GPU power needed for really smooth gameplay, is just noticeably higher.
Good context for series veterans. Okay, let's try and wrap this all up. Final thoughts, recommendations for people wanting to jump into Doom. The Dark Ages on PC.
Okay, let's summarize. Doom, the Dark Ages looks great, pushes visuals with mandatory ray tracing, but that means higher GPU demands than we're used to from Doom.
Minimum baseline.
For 1080p low, aiming for 60 FPS, you need at least that RTX 2060 Super or RX 6600 with 8GB VRAM. That matches the official spec.
And for higher settings or resolutions?
For 1440p high settings at 60 FPS, you should probably aim for an RTX 3080 or RX 6800 level card or better. And definitely think about using DLSS or FSR there.
4K Ultra.
That's top tier territory for 60 FPS native, RTX 4090, 5090, maybe the RX 7900 XTX. Anything less powerful, upscaling is pretty much essential for 4K.
And don't forget the surprising RX 9070 XT performance.
Right, and the decent showing from the Intel Arc B580 at 1080p Ultra.
So upscaling is key for most people above 1080p low.
Absolutely vital. DLSS 4 with MFG looks particularly promising if you have a compatible NVIDIA card. But explore all options. Just watch out for that potential frame gen latency.
And remember the drivers.
Always use the latest game-ready drivers. Experiment with the upscaling settings. And yeah, be aware the optimization might not be quite Eternal level yet, but patches could improve things.
And the absolute hard requirement, need a ray tracing capable GPU. No RT, no game on PC.
Correct. Non-RT cards are unfortunately out.
So the final verdict, impressive game, looks great, but demands serious hardware, especially compared to its predecessors, thanks mainly to always-on ray tracing. Upscaling is your friend here.
That's the gist. So recommendations breakdown.
Go for it.
1080p gaming, RTX 3060 Ti RX 6700 XT for high settings, minimum specs for low. Intel Arc B580 is also a decent high settings 1080p option.
Okay, 1440p.
Aim for RTX 3080 RX 6800 or better for high ultra at 60 FPS. Use DLSS FSR.
4K gaming.
You need the big guns. RTX 4090, 5090, RX 7900 XTX for consistent 60 FPS ultra native. Upscaling highly recommended otherwise.
Fantastic summary. So wrapping up our deep dive, Doom, The Dark Ages asks more of your PC because of its visual steps forward, especially that mandatory RT.
Yep, set your expectations based on your resolution and GPU, and definitely leverage those upscaling techs. They're crucial for accessibility here.
Which leads to maybe a final thought for everyone listening.
Yeah.
Given this mandatory retracing and the performance hit compared to older, super optimized Doom titles, how might this trend of demanding always-on features affect PC gaming accessibility going forward? Is this the new normal?
Ooh, that is a good question. Definitely something to ponder. How does demanding tech impact who gets to play the latest games on PC?
Food for thought indeed. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
My pleasure.
Until our next exploration.